Everybody had a good Christmas, as it's time for the Sam Amick Show, being brought to you by all your Jiffy Lube locations in the greater Sacramento area. There he is, ready to roll this morning. Thanks, Sam Amick.
Good morning, Jay. Merry Christmas, happy holidays. Hope you guys had a good one, my friend.
We did. How about you? Is everything good with you?
Yeah, no complaints. Got a little bit of holiday fatigue, where you're having a good time and trying to sneak in sleep between driving around and watching a few games. But yeah, we had a very good one.
Is there an Amick tradition that's unique to your family on Christmas or anything like that?
I mean, we're certainly on my side of the family, a Christmas Eve family in terms of the tradition. My late mother was a big Christmas Eve fan. She used to host every single year. And so shout out to my sister Kelly, who busted out Mom's old eggnog, which is very stiff. With my other sister Kim and our families. So the eggnog was a Christmas Eve highlight, and then just getting the kids together on Christmas Day and seeing everybody getting bigger was a very good time.
I know in your line of work, or all of ours, you're constantly working. Was yesterday observing the NBA games, or were you kind of working partly, or just it's all kind of future notes for future articles?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't mind admitting my favorite part, or one of my favorite parts, probably shouldn't say my favorite, but of this job, I've had previous jobs where it was just a absolute non-negotiable part of the job to be at a Christmas Day game. And as much as I have enjoyed some of those games in person, I've kind of, with this gig at the Athletic, where we have a deep staff and a lot of folks at games, I kind of sneak away on Christmas Day a little bit, and I'm watching the action. So the fun part was, like yesterday morning before we really got going, it's kind of a lazy sitting on the couch with my youngest son watching Knicks Spurs and kind of putting your fan hat on a little bit, where you're going, man, what a game, and he's like a lot of people, so fascinated by Wemby and seeing what Wemby's doing out there. And then Mikal Bridges going crazy. So, you're watching it because it's part of the gig, but it was probably a little closer to the casual fan experience than normal.
I was saying this earlier, Sam, and it feels like I'm nitpicking a little bit on the league because they make these schedules in August, but the two best teams in the league, one in the East, one in the West, OKC and Cleveland. Yeah, smaller markets, but they weren't on. Giannis is one of the stars of the league. He wasn't on, but look, it still was stacked with high level players and teams, and some pretty good games yesterday too.
Yeah, I mean, that first one was tremendous. They're going to get Wemby in the spotlight, so that makes sense. They're going to have the Knicks in the spotlight. Agree or disagree, that is typically the case. And then, you go down the line, of course, they're going to have LeBron and Steph. I mean, if you had to, nitpick, I think, like you said, maybe Dallas, Minnesota is, there's plenty of stars in that game.
Yeah.
But as far as like which teams, quote unquote, earned the spot, but it's hard. They can't handicap. They could handicap that OKC would be what they are.
Yeah.
It's probably not as much Cleveland to that degree. And then the Milwaukee thing, I get Giannis's point. He's actually been pretty vocal publicly about how he thought it was, disrespectful to not have the Bucks in there. But what also strikes me, Jay, is it's funny. Like, people in my life who see me watching games on Christmas Day, I always hear this comment of like, "Oh man, the players got to play on Christmas Day. Like, what about their families?" And I always find it so interesting. Like, players really care. You know what I mean? Like, they want to play on Christmas Day. And you see, like, forget about the money they make for a minute. Like, I looked at social media today, and LeBron's wife, Savannah, on her Instagram account had a video of Savannah with Bryce and Zuri dancing in their pajamas. I don't know if it was Christmas Eve or Christmas, but they were, what appeared to be celebrating the holiday while LeBron and Bronny were working. You know what I mean? And it was kind of fascinating and relatable, where you can see them having a good time, while dad and his son were away doing their thing. So just a few of my takeaways from yesterday.
I want to start you. Well, not start you. We've already gotten going here, but go with the Kings here, Sam. With They're in a bad way right now. There's no denying that. Lots of rumors, speculation, all that kind of stuff out there. How broken after 30 games right now would you say the Kings are?
I mean, I can't speak for them. They appear pretty broken. I think it's 11 out of 16. The stuff that you see that is somewhat, alarm bell-ish is in the last game, for example. I think I've told you before how I know it's a funny little habit, but how I have binoculars at games where I enjoy kind of taking a peek at body language and how so-and-so reacting to, positive or negative. You just, because the media seats are a little farther than back in the old days, it's a way to get closer to the action. And it's like, man, they, in the Pacers game, when they were down late, they call a timeout and you just look at the huddle, and Mike Brown and his staff were about 20 feet away game planning before rejoining the huddle. And you're looking in the huddle going, man, nobody's saying a word. Like, it's just dead silence. Guys are just seemingly down and defeated. And the leadership and that, at least, and it's probably not fair. It's a snapshot, but that's the type of stuff that makes you go, all right, how do they pull out of this? Because, it seems like Mike Brown has shared a few comments publicly, in my opinion, what appears to be, nudging and pushing De'Aaron in the leadership category, where he's kind of highlighted the fact that he's played well, but we need more. And that's part of his messaging. Sabonis certainly is part of that leadership group. Malik Monk as well. I don't know how they get out of it, because you talk to scouts from other teams that were at the game, and one guy in particular, I thought was interesting because his non-emotional response as an objective party to the Kings was just like, man, they're a good team. Like, he kind of was saying, like, you just got to ride it out. There's a lot of parity in the West and in the league in general. And he had a very pragmatic look at it, where he thought they were still a good team and that they could rattle off 5, 6, 7 in a row and be fine. But man, that was, such a contrast to the mood and the perspective, I think, both on the team and locally.
Yeah, that's why I was saying this earlier, Sam. They're a bit of a puzzle to me, and I don't think people would be that bothered, besides being fans of the team, if they were 13 and 17, if people didn't believe that they were a good team or could be a good team. I don't think they had false expectations. No one was talking about a championship, but I think being a top 6 wasn't a crazy thought. So they're not there now. They haven't played like that. They haven't looked like that. And then some of their metrics show, a top 17 defense, a top 10 offense. It's not really adding up, and I'm not exactly sure why. That's, I think, to me, from watching them play, they look like a 13 and 17 team, but some of the statistics and some of the metrics and even the talent level doesn't seem like they're a 13 and 17 team.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one thing that I'll spotlight and highlight here that is definitely an issue, because you hit on all the team-wide metrics that are encouraging. And, when we wrote our story last week about De'Aaron and his situation, we highlighted a lot of this and the reasons for kind of a glasses half full perspective. I will say the thing that right now would worry me if I was the Kings and Mike Brown, and the whole group, is I'm looking and cheating here at DeMar DeRozan's game log.
Yeah.
And, like, you're talking about a 4-game stretch where, I'm doing the rough math. I mean, he's averaging probably around 10, 11 points a game, a high of 17, a low of 2 in that Pacers game. That Pacers game was weird to watch. Like, to see him only take 7 shots, and the crunch time stuff that you alluded to, because, they're a good team. And then you get down the stretch where the idea was, man, you got De'Aaron Fox and DeMar DeRozan. Those are 2 guys that are in the running for the Jerry West Clutch Award every single year. But sometimes too much of a good thing is too much. And they've had a hard time figuring out how to close. And in the Pacers game again, it's, man, like watching De'Aaron down the stretch. And I told someone this, and I could be wrong. I'm probably trying to be a sports psychologist here, but like watching him be seemingly hesitant on a couple of possessions. He almost lost the ball late, was a little sloppy with it, and then had a floater in the lane that was just short. To me, if you're him, what has changed from this year compared to last year and previous years is in that crunch time, kind of spot, you knew all the energy in the room was coming your way. You're the guy. It's just all there is to it. And it seems like they're having a harder time not only figuring out who's going to close shot wise, but I think, it's just the type of thing that it might impact the energy or the way you think in that moment. And De'Aaron, has just not been as good. And obviously DeMar hasn't as well. So like some real issues that I think are there right now. The crowd chanting Keon Ellis late because I want to see Keon, which kind of speaks to a couple of things, but the defensive side continuing to be an issue and people looking at Keon as a guy that could help there, even though that might be debatable given how he's played this year. So, I mean, again, they're in a bad spot. And we'll see what they do.
And then the bigger picture, I know you wrote about it last week, you and Anthony Slater from The Athletic, about kind of De'Aaron and his future. And I think that was a good point you brought up earlier, Sam. And I agree with you that Mike Brown's kind of gone out of his way to highlight De'Aaron, to nudge De'Aaron, to say, look, he could be great. We need a player like him to go from the beginning, to lead, all that stuff. There's just I feel like everything is on De'Aaron right now. Not that he's not capable of carrying the team, but just him and his future. How much of what they're going through right now do you think is impacting what his future decision will be?
I don't know. I mean, some of his teammates were asked about the situation after the last game. Admittedly, it did crack me up a little bit that, like, not to sound jaded, but sometimes we tiptoe around these stories as if there's just, we're talking about global affairs. You know what I mean? And there were these questions in the press conference from some local media friends of ours that were like, how are you guys handling the noise? And it's like, well, it is what it is. I mean, De'Aaron's agent came to town and had a meeting with Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox in the front office. And, we wrote about it. And this is a tale as old as time, a prominent player who has an unresolved contract situation, who is trying to read the room and figure out if the goals and the aspirations and the plans of the organization continue to align with the way he sees his career. So that's where that is at. Easier said than done. I would argue that, his teammates and his coaches need to just compartmentalize it and keep it moving. And as long as he is performing, which for the most part he has, then you got to let that other stuff play out. I know this is probably a bad comp, but covering those Warriors teams all those years when Kevin Durant was in town, it taught me that everything I just said about compartmentalize and keep it moving is definitely easier said than done. The Warriors guys around Kevin, when he went consecutive years choosing to have essentially 1-year contracts because he wanted his freedom, or he wanted to be in control, it clearly bothered guys around him because they just wondered if he was all in. Now, again, that's a bad comp because the contract stuff is very different, but that is, one of the many times when I saw how it is challenging for a team, to continue being at its best while this stuff is kind of playing out on the side. But, the meeting by all accounts was fine. The results are going to be the thing here. Just, can they find a way to push this thing in a good direction? What's going to happen? I'm sure we'll jump into it, but with the trade deadline coming up, the Kings are considered among the more aggressive teams at this point. We'll see if that bears any fruit, but they're trying to find solutions.
I mean, they probably go hand in hand, Sam, but do you think they're allegedly or reportedly more active because of De'Aaron or because of 13 and 17 and feeling like they're a better team than they are?
Yeah, I actually think it's the latter. I mean, they do go hand in hand for sure. But like, even with the questions of, is somebody going to get fired in the front office or Mike Brown? My read of that room has been that, the front office has got no illusions about the roster and the need for it to improve, and that this is a player problem. It's just they have too many holes. It's the rim protection, it's the defense, it's on the wings, it's the shooting. They are trying to fill holes on the roster, and I think that was the case regardless. Because if you go back to when they added DeMar in the summer, you can, looking back on it, you could tell that there was all this excitement of what he would bring offensively and what he brought as a veteran and a guy who's legitimately, an all-time great in his respect. He's going to continue to march up the scoring list. He's an incredible player, but the quiet part that nobody was kind of saying very loudly is that, they just didn't solve some of the other issues on the roster that DeMar wasn't a fix for.
So if it's, front office thinking it's more of a player problem, some roster holes to fill, I believe they've got some assets to flip. It's just some of them are in the rotation. I just don't know if they're going to work around the edges or plan a big splash here. Any kind of read on that?
I don't see a big splash coming. And to me, the only big splashes, like they're not in on, to my knowledge, I'll qualify. They're not in on Jimmy Butler. They've certainly made calls on Zach LaVine. That's a guy, as you guys know, like they signed that contract, years ago. So you inquire about Zach, but I don't see that happening. Similar read of the room with Brandon Ingram. So once you get past those guys, then you're talking about role players. Now, the guy that, is probably kind of the belle of the ball, who's not a star, is Cam Johnson in Brooklyn, because the Kings certainly would love to get him, but I feel like every team you end up talking to right now is in on Cam Johnson. So that one is going to be tough to pull off. But I think it's more role player types and impact rotation players. But the tricky quandary they are in terms of getting something done is that Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles financially certainly gets you to the kind of number where you could bring a guy back who's going to be an impact player, but they're not eager. I mean, as far as draft assets, they're certainly not eager to part ways with too many of those, even though they will look at it. But the other issue is that Keegan Murray, I think even with his offensive struggles, I think there's, he's certainly not untouchable, but there's no change for us and for our reporting of the way they see him in terms of, and that's a guy that, could yield you something in return and be a game changer in negotiations. But he's also a guy that Mike Brown is leaning on very heavily on the defensive side. And they still feel like the offense will come around. And all in all, they are buying Keegan Murray stock still. So without him being in talks, then, does your offer stand out among all these other offers at this time of year? We'll have to wait and see.
We know this all moves pretty quickly. I mean, this team worked themselves back to 500 at 13-13 and was probably feeling okay about themselves. And you lose 4 in a row the way they have at home, and it feels like a little bit more desperation is in the air. We obviously have a deadline in February, but Sam, is your hunch? I mean, they can't let it unravel too far, in which it's getting close to that point. How aggressive or how quickly do you think they need to do something to try to right the ship?
Yeah. It's hard though. You can't move the market, use Cam Johnson, for example. Like, I mean, unless you're gonna
Overpay.
That's it. You're gonna, so if you either overpay or move, try to move the market like that, it's just not going to work. So I hear you for sure. And plenty of moves have happened this time of year versus at the deadline, but they don't have that asset that the rest of the league is coming for, that they are willing to give up. And that's how you get something done right now, is like, you got extra money in your pocket, so to speak. And it's just a matter of choosing to spend it to get what you want. That's not the position they're in.
Yeah. I was saying this earlier, Sam. It was early on in the show. I was driving home from the in-laws yesterday, and I listened to basically the last part of the second quarter and all of the second half of Tim Roy and Tom Tolbert in the Warrior game. And man, listening to them, I go, man, this sounds exactly like Sacramento. They were talking about how they're in a home stretch. They've given games away. They can't. This team hasn't found themselves. Now they've got a better record than the Kings, and they nearly came back, but they lost. And just how maddening this team is. I think the only saving grace I see right now for the Kings is kind of that top 3 to 4 is separating themselves. And so from 5 to the Kings, I feel like every team is very similar. It's just right now that group has a better record than the Kings. So they're staying with the pack, even though they're kind of a mess right now.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I looked at it right before jumping on. I mean, I think they're 4 games out of the 6th spot. Is that correct? I think
Out of even 5th, yeah.
5th, yeah. So, that seems very doable. Now, you're right. Like, it is a very, very crowded group, and you see a team like we mentioned, the Spurs almost beating the Knicks yesterday. But even the way the Spurs played, you're kind of watching that team going, "Oh boy, they're not going away." You know what I mean? Like that's now a team that is in the mix. This one comment stuck with me recently that JJ Redick made, and I think it was during the Lakers' first game remember when he kind of waxed poetic about how people don't celebrate the game enough.
Yeah.
He highlighted parody, and he talked about how for all these years people complained that there's no point to the regular season because you knew who was going to be in the finals, and it was the Cavs and the Warriors. So his point was, why now that that's not the NBA anymore, now that so many more fan bases can legitimately think that their team is in the mix, why is the parity not celebrated? And within that, he complimented the Kings, and he said, look at this Sacramento, I'm paraphrasing, but look at this Sacramento team we're about to face. Like, they're an incredible team, and they have a losing record. And it's not because they're a bad team. And it kind of struck me because a guy like JJ, not only a smart guy, but he's going to be clear-eyed in his view of a team like the Kings. He's just giving his opinion of an opponent. And I think that statement still rings true. It's just a matter of, okay, but what's the spirit of the group? How kind of battered is the collective psyche, if you will, and how do they pull out of it, and how do they start winning a couple of games? Now, since I do think you have it in front of you, Jay, what is the schedule looking like? I know they have a game, I think, Sunday night. What are the next few games
for the Kings?
Yeah.
Tonight they host Detroit. Then they're back. Yeah, back in LA against the Lakers for the final matchup, and then home again for Dallas, Philly, Memphis.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy part about parity is you could win all of those or drop all of those.
Right.
All of them, and by like Detroit included.
Yeah.
So buckle up.
Yeah. Well, and kind of on that note, I mean, how warm is the seat then, would you say, for a guy like Mike Brown, for Monty McNair? Like, I mean, we know players don't get let go. I mean, they can get traded, but right now I don't know where the front office is, where overall management, Vivek and that group is thinking, but how warm would you say the seats are for the coach and for the GM?
I mean, I continue to, I haven't checked in a couple days, but continue to be a little surprised that, there's just not, we'll see if this statement holds up, but like, there's not smoke. And part of it is in, my many years of tracking this type of stuff is typically, or at least sometimes you start to hear about the possible replacements first. You know what I mean? And I'm not hearing that on either side. Now, the front office thing is tricky because you got to, the deadline's 6 weeks away. And, so I'm not hearing names about, I mean, whether, who knows, they could, get rid of Monty and elevate Wes, the assistant GM. That's something they could do. But I think I've not heard anybody say that's in the plans. And if you're going to replace all of them, I mean, who is it? And is that a good idea with this much time left? I'm trying to think. I don't remember a front office change happening from a timing standpoint like that, because it could be a disaster. You turn around and somebody's having to get their feet wet right away with all these massive roster decisions staring them in the face. Then on the coaching front, same thing. I mean, you don't hear about a replacement until you do. So that could always change, but I'm not hearing that right now. And as of a couple of days ago, I guess what you would say is kind of Mike's camp was indicating that, like, no word from the Kings that he's in serious trouble here. So I think they're just trying to honestly push through it and find solutions.
All right, Sam, what else? What are you working on The Athletic here right now?
Honestly, just kind of pivoting and getting back into things. The Lakers are certainly on my radar a little bit, trying to learn a little bit more about their trade deadline, and for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of years and years of standing pat. And so now the question of, as LeBron gets older, he's turning 40, I think tomorrow, 2 days from now, something like that. Is Rob Pelinka, that front office and that organization, going to finally make an impact move to make them more legitimate? Or if, and this is granted, they've pulled off a few nice wins. Do they need to look the other way and think about tearing it down eventually if this group has a ceiling? So that's something that I'm peeking at. I'm looking forward to seeing, I think Monday night, I think it's mentioned Warriors Cavs. It's not the Warriors Cavs battle of old, but Cleveland being in town is on my radar. I enjoy the way they play. I enjoy watching Donovan Mitchell play ball. He's a fun ball player. Kenny Atkinson's had a great impact on that group. So we'll get another look at them and see if the Warriors can, pull that off. So just kind of, jumping around.
Yeah, doing your regular old thing there for The Athletic. Make sure you check out Sam's work. Always great to check in with Sam each and every Thursday. Sam, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate you.
Right. Thank you. That is the great Sam Amick from The Athletic. Again, this show's brought to you by all your Jiffy Lube locations in the greater Sacramento area. We break, come back. 4 Down Territory is next.